Have you ever heard the saying that everyone has a dark side? It's just how good you're able to hide that dark side. Now, let's walk through the story of a so-called madman in the story Tale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Nervous, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. I think it was his eyes. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Now, this point, you fancy me mad, but you should see how calmly I can tell you the whole story. You should see it, how wisely I proceed. I was never kinder to the old man that whole week before I had killed him. Upon the eighth night, I was more than cautious in opening the door. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my powers. To think that I was opening the door, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern, but my thumb slipped upon the thin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet, still, and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening. He had been trying to fancy them causeless. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only mouse crossing the floor." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to a little opening, a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. Meantime, the headless tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room in an instant. I dragged him into the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gamely to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was dead. He was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. If you still think I'm mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned. I worked hastily, but in silence. For of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I took up three planks from the flooring of the chamber and dispositioned all between the scantling. I then replaced the boards so cleverly could have detected anything wrong. When I had made an end of these labor, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear now? There entered three men who introduced themselves with perfect confidence as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been accused. Information had been lodged at the police officer, and the officers had been deputed to search the premise. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them that they sat a while I answered cheerily. They chatted of familiar things. My head ached, and I fancied a vein in my ear. But still they sat and still chatted. The ring became more distinct. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as wash makes one envelope in cotton. I gasped for air, and yet the officer heard it not. I paced to floor I paced to the floor as if excited for further observation of the man. But this noise steadily increased. It grew louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly. Was it possible they had heard not? Almighty God! No, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. And there the story ended. Thank you.